Hi, everyone, and welcome to CoachHub's webinar, Coaching is Contagious, the Power of Digital Coaching in Supporting Change. My name is Dr. Liz Pavese, and I'm the Director of Behavioral Science at CoachHub, where we get to bring the power of digital coaching to all employees at all career levels to really support them in their individual growth and transformation while organizations are going through their own changes and transformations. Before we dive into the kind of nuts and bolts of today's conversation, I wanted to present to you, three really inspiring leaders who have one thing in common. And I invite you to reflect on, what do you think these three leaders from very different industries have in common? What it comes down to is that Satya, Victoria, and Simon all understood the importance of identifying and embedding core behavioral skills that would really help their people and organizations thrive during times of critical change in their organizations. They've centered on concepts like growth mindset to really encourage a different approach and philosophy to learning and developing. It shows how we can value the learning process and innate capabilities around growing and developing from an openness perspective. There's another focus in these organizations' changes in terms of relationships, really getting connected in understanding who you are in context of the relationships that you're navigating and building to influence other people, to collaborate and to communicate in an ever-changing environment, and in an environment that requires very different ways of working than before. So with these three leaders really being champions and leading forward incredible shifts in their organization's operating models over the last many years, and truly building a culture to support those changes, we really want to talk about in this webinar today how building some more of these capabilities is incredibly important to driving change. So let's kind of start out with some pretty interesting statistics that we're seeing in the world of work. What we can see is that particularly in the US and in Canada, the job market is really bouncing back. There are some differences in particular across industries, but in general, now is a really good time for people to be finding a job, which is a little different compared to other job markets across the world. But while there is this dynamic, there's all these dynamics in the workplace with lots of opportunities and relatively low employment, employees really aren't bouncing back as quickly. We still see that there are very low levels of engagement, and in fact, people are actually suffering in terms of their thriving. Probably not surprising given the pandemic and many other societal changes in the last few years. What we can also see is that by the end of this year, there is a projected 20% increase in voluntary turnover in the US, which is really interesting given that there is an abundance of jobs and opportunities out there. But what we know is that even with that voluntary turnover, most of that voluntary turnover is preventable. It comes down to factors like career development, job opportunities, different elements of the work environment, feeling supported by managers. Those are some of those drivers behind that turnover that are within our control to prevent. Another kind of interesting dynamic that's happening is that while there's an abundance of jobs and opportunities, and we see a lot of people either leaving the workforce or making some pretty big pivots in their career toward different opportunities or different, that's embracing their different capabilities, A lot of that is also having to do with the fact that industries are transforming at a pretty exponential rate and making very distinct shifts in what they used to be, how they used to be oriented and how they operated in the past. This is a fairly busy visual image that comes from Josh Bersin and company, but basically what it's showing is the different changes that industries are going through right at the same time that we have these dynamic shifts in the workforce. You have, for example, retailers that are becoming more like healthcare companies. You have healthcare companies that are really doubling down in the informatics and becoming much more focused on big data and analytics. You have automotive industries that are becoming more like electrical manufacturers. You have chemical and oil companies that are moving into more renewable and sustainable energies. All of these shifts require very different skills and capabilities to really push into the next generation of what they're doing in the global economy. So this altogether really is taking an interesting toll in organizations around how do we manage these shifts? How do we support these changes? How do we support, re-engaging our people to want to stay amidst all of these incredible opportunities? And for those that we can attract and retain, how do we build their skill and capability to fuel these dynamic industry shifts that we need to make in order to be successful and thrive? And so it's no surprise that some of the key talent trends that we're seeing and what's top of mind for HR leaders, for CEOs, and pretty much every executive is how we're continuing to develop the next generation of leaders, really focusing in on that skill and competency development. That's the top priority. And underneath it all, there's over 80% of companies that are really less focused on the technical skills and capabilities that they're developing. Not that that's not important, but really focused on the foundational or power skills that are really going to help people navigate these changes and make these shifts more quickly. So the question they're all asking themselves is, in order to navigate these changes and these shifting tides, how can we fortify our human capital investments? How can we invest in our people in such a way that it helps them thrive and helps our organizations thrive? The first way is really to focus on developing those power skills. So let's dive a little bit into what we mean by that. This is another really great visual. It's a little busy, but adaptation from Josh Bersin and company around this shift that we're seeing from a focus on business-centered capabilities to human-centered capabilities. Now, it's not that the business-centered capabilities aren't important anymore, but it's that we need a little bit more focus on the how of work. So when you can see, kind of a perspective in the business-centered mindset being focused on how do we put in place the right goals, reward incentives, and alignment for an organization, and training our managers on managing goals and reward systems and creating alignment. That is absolutely important. But what's really going to take us into the next sort of iteration of our world of work is going to be the inspirational approach in how we communicate vision and goals and align people, how we give more autonomy and empowerment to folks to make decisions at the right point in time where they need to be made. So that's just an example of some of these shifts that really are going to be required to navigate this consistent flow of change for the future. So where do you sit? Where is your company today in terms of this focus of being more business-centered in how you're approaching developing your managers and leaders? versus this more human-centered capability or power skill focus? Give that a thought. Probably somewhere in between. What's very interesting about the approach, though, that we need to take in terms of thinking about how do we grow and develop these power skills, it is different from the past. Power skills, or these foundational skills, are highly complex to develop. It's not enough to know what these skills are or what they look like, but it takes a lot of practice. It takes time for reflection. It takes time to test out and try new perspectives. It takes time to unlearn some approaches before you can make space for new approaches. And that is a big difference in how we need to shift our learning and development approaches in order to keep at pace with fostering this new skill and capability development. Leadership skills are evolving, but the approach that we take in traditional learning and development, which is classic classroom training, doesn't effectively help with the development of these power skills, because it takes more than just knowledge acquisition to put these kinds of skills into effect. We've heard before that one of the biggest challenges of our classic training approaches is that there's that lack of learning transfer. So when you look at, the fact that most of what we learn is forgotten within 6 days, that is because training focuses on the acquisition of knowledge, right? How and what does empathy, not how does empathy work, but what does empathy look like? What are those skills that I need to put into place in order to practice this effectively? Often, training is only addressing that what is it, not the how do you do it and what have you learned from that practice. A second challenge with our traditional approaches to learning is that it really lacks that contextualization of learning. It doesn't take into account different learning styles, often doesn't take into account the unique personalities and motivations of each of the learners in that setting. There's often very different expectations that people are coming with. And there's also a difference in, depending on the role, your responsibility, the function that you occupy in the organization, the learning that you are acquiring may need to show up very differently depending on how that is put into practice in your particular job. So we all learn differently. And without a complement of some personalized types of interventions to classic training, it's not as likely that we're going to be able to fuel the changes that our organizations need for the future, much like we saw with the 3 leaders and the changes that they've led in their organizations over the last several years. So learning and developing power skills requires consistent practice, reflection, feedback, and measurement of progress, which means that we need to complement training with solutions like digital coaching, like mentoring, and a few other many other experiential types of learning and development to sustain that learning and ensure that it can be applied and integrated into a new way of behaving over time. And we know that from research, when we combine training with coaching, it has a 4-time increase in productivity and other outcomes than training does on its own. So it's a really powerful fertilizer for fueling change and transformation at an individual level, that when we do that at such a scale and have many people going through the appropriate learning and development changes that are going to help them develop new skills and capabilities that align to what your organization needs, it's going to lead to organizational change and transformation. So developing power skills is an incredibly important focus for supporting change, and coaching can be really impactful in that. The second thing that we want to address is how we can keep our people well. So we saw in the beginning of today's webinar that while there's all of this change and lots of opportunity in how our industries are changing, there's new jobs on the market, new opportunities available, people really aren't doing very well. And that is one of the key reasons that's fueling a lot of this voluntary turnover, as well as different demands and different reprioritization of time and energy and effort when you think of work in context of one person's whole life. So an important second step that organizations can take in really supporting people through change and building their capabilities is to focus on how we keep our people well. People are reprioritizing what matters to them. We see that burnout in all industries, in all professions, is at an all-time high, and this is even more so for those in the healthcare industry. And burnout will disproportionately affect your high performers and high potentials, because in order to burn out, you have to be incredibly engaged in your work, but you're trying to manage long stress for a prolonged period of time, which becomes unmanageable. So we really want to focus on helping to mitigate burnout where possible, but even for those who are experiencing it, how can we help them recover from it? When we look at where the highest levels of disengagement are happening, it's fairly consistent across the board. However, some interesting new research from Gallup shows that of those that are classified as least engaged, 54% of them are of the younger generations in the workforce, the younger millennials and Generation Z. They're being more vocal about how and when they're spending their time because of what they value. So what do we do with all of this? How do we help people reprioritize their priorities, their boundaries? How do we help them build some kind of new capabilities around how to manage stress and curb this burnout? Well, first, let's really understand what's happening with well-being and burnout. Burnout is at an all-time high. It shows up in different phases. It doesn't just happen. It actually happens over a prolonged period of time. People become emotionally exhausted, which leads to being very cynical and not this idea of not caring anymore. And then this basically throwing your hands up in the air and giving up and feeling completely ineffective. And this is incredibly detrimental, not only to the people that go through burnout, but to the people that are around them, be that your coworkers or be that your family, your friends. It has a ripple effect. So how do we really fortify the well-being bank account that we each individually have, which then accumulates to the well-being bank account that exists in our organizations? Every day, we're making withdrawals and deposits into that well-being bank account. We are doing things that either refuel our mental capacities, our emotional capacities, our skills and capabilities, or we're doing things that deplete them. So what are we doing to help balance that? Unfortunately, we have this big misconception that our health and our well-being will return to normal once we have time to recover. But when you have such change happening all the time, right? Change is truly the only constant. We have to be able to fortify ourselves in the midst of that change and be able to recover as those changes are happening. So I invite you to really reflect. How balanced is your well-being bank account as a leader, as a manager? And then how would you assess that for each individual on your team, as from an outsider looking in? In order to really help our teams be well, we have to ensure that we are well ourselves. Now, the good news is that there is a road to recovery in rebuilding our well-being and in helping to get out of the phases of burnout that we just talked about. And the road to that recovery is also the keys to prevention. So here are 3 important tactics, if you will, or practices that will really help with addressing burnout, but more importantly, with helping to prevent it. First, it's incredibly important to help people learn to detach, to mentally let go of work and create the space for other life boundaries during non-work hours. Second, it's important to find relaxation. And relaxation is different for everyone. But really, this is about finding those low effort activities. It can be low effort in terms of physical effort or social effort, but it has this lower effort that is much more, I think of it as what can help you do the deep sigh and just kind of sit in a place of that weight being lifted off your shoulders. The third thing is about mastery. This might seem a little counterintuitive, given that burnout happens when you're highly engaged in work or in doing something that, puts your skills and expertise and experiences to practice. But mastery is, in fact, something that helps people, helps to prevent and recover from burnout. And that's about being engaged in activities that really stretch and help you learn. It's one of our key motivators as human beings is to exercise our competence, to be able to demonstrate that we have some skill and mastery for things. So an example for me is, it's very easy for me to continue to let my workday kind of roll by me and work 10 hours a day. And that's not healthy. So it's something that I need to particularly work on. And while it might seem that then when I'm spending a few hours in the evening painting, that is, again, exerting a lot of time and effort, in fact, it is a form of relaxation for myself because that painting is a little bit lower effort in terms of my cognitive functioning. It also taps into a different type of skill set that I have and that I'm building that allows me to detach from work, but still exercise some skills in a place that I'm trying to build competence. And what's really fascinating is that during times of constant change, it is even more important to provide different types of support and intervention. Because the experience of well-being, the experience of burnout, the experience of stress is very unique and individual, coaching is a really powerful intervention to help with building the skills and capabilities to help people be well. How do we help people develop the skills and capabilities around building their resilience, How do we help people, build some awareness and new mechanisms to emotionally regulate, to deal with understanding how different changes are impacting their emotional state and engaging in different reactions or responses when it calls for that. Coaching has a really powerful impact on employee well-being, especially during times of change. It will help them be more solution focused. Coaching can help build self-efficacy and resilience, and therefore be able to better handle, regulate, and deal with change. And it helps them focus and achieve their goals more effectively. So coaching is really powerful, not only in developing those power skills, but many of those power and human-oriented skills are very much related to being able to keep our people well and bolster those capabilities that help them navigate from one change to the next. Coaching is incredibly contagious. It has an incredible ripple effect. With one person being coached, learning a new approach, thinking of new ways to reframe a problem, creating the awareness and skills to ask different questions, to acknowledge individuals, to provide feedback. Those kinds of skills and behaviors affect the immediate circle and then some around that one person, because those skills and behaviors are integrated and modeled and show up in one-on-one interactions, as well as in broader team or social interactions. So we can imagine what could happen if we were able to bring coaching to one person, 5 people, 10 people, 50 people over time, what that can do to get you to a tipping point of supporting change and transformation in your companies. So as we think about and reflect on some of the key areas we covered today, I want you to really think about how you're honing those power skills. And if it hasn't been a central focus, or you're somewhere in between that continuum of more business-centered versus human-centered, double down now. It's really important for your organization's survival and transformation to help your people thrive in building those kinds of skill sets and capabilities. Burnout is getting in the way. And in order to help prevent it and support those recovering from it, we have to, one, understand the phases of it, but also really tap into those 3 key elements that can be put into practice in a very small and meaningful way day to day to help people regularly detach, relax, and practice their skills in a way that is not overly unmanageable in terms of raising stress levels. And then finally, coaching can really be a powerful lever to help build those power skills and to help create that space and that capability to reflect on what it is a person needs most in order for them to thrive, which will help your organization thrive. I want to thank you so much for listening in to our webinar today. I invite you to visit our CoachHub website for any additional tools and thought leadership on coaching, and we'd love to connect with you further.